Hello and welcome to my book review for The Always War by Margaret Peterson Haddix. This is a middle grade dystopic novel about a young girl whose country has always been at war. For as long as she can remember, and as long as her parents can remember, and as long as the oldest person she's ever met can remember, her country, Westham, has been at war with its neighboring country, Eastham. When a boy from her childhood is awarded a Medal of Honor for his role in the war, he refuses and runs away. Tessa can't help but follow him on a journey that takes her into enemy territory, and she discovers a secret that changes everything she's ever thought she knew. I gave this book 3 stars. I really love Margaret Peterson Haddix. I have since I was a kid. I try to pick up her books every so often because they're always wonderful reads. And I do think this was one of her lesser books because usually I'm so enthralled by the world. I'm so enthralled by the characters. I do find they go a little too quickly for my taste, but overall I love them. And this book I didn't love so much. I wanted to care so much more about the characters than I did. And I think part of that is because it's so short. This is only 197 pages, which is not very long. And truthfully, it feels a lot shorter than that. It takes about 100 pages for anything to happen in this book, for the characters to discover any new information, and even longer for them to come to any conclusions about that information. And it does feel like you're waiting for so long for something to happen. And then by the time it does happen, by the time the characters start making realizations about their world, about what's going on, the book is almost done and it's time to start wrapping things up and get to that conclusion. And the first half of this book felt like it dragged on so much, like nothing was happening, like you were just waiting to get to the point. And the second half felt so rushed, like there wasn't enough time to actually develop everything that was happening and needed to be wrapped up neatly by the end. And it was a little bit disappointing. I did love the world. I did love the concept of this and the commentary. It's so interesting. Haddix always does such a good job at just creating these really interesting worlds and offering such in-depth social commentary, but packaged in a way that's very appropriate for kids. And I do remember picking up on that as a child because I always found her books so interesting. Even though they weren't my usual thing, even though I was very much into contemporaries, I remember reading these and just finding it fascinating that everything that's happening in this world is kind of in some specific way related to our world and related to some problem or question that we have in our world. And I think she does a wonderful job of that for children, and I think it holds up really well for adults. Again, it was rushed in this book, but it was still there. For me as a reader, and especially as an adult reading this book that was published in 2011, it was very obvious to me, at least, that it was inspired by the Iraq War. There's a lot of commentary on what it means to be involved in a war, what it means to be a blind participant, to not ask any questions of your government, to just be involved in this horrific thing that you know nothing about. And especially as an outsider, when you're not actively a participant in the violence, when you're a bystander, or when you're flying planes and bombing people from afar, just sitting at a computer, and that's how you bomb things. And it was very, very interesting to read. And again, 100% appropriate for children. There's no heavy violence or anything. It was interesting. That was what always drew me to her as a child, was that her books were so interesting, and I loved that. And I do think that shows through here, even though this isn't one of my favorites of hers. One thing that I did struggle with a lot was the main character. She is a very passive character, and I do actually like that in books. I know a lot of people don't like passive main characters. You want an active character who's going to be an active participant in the story. They are performing their role. They're pushing the story along. And I do really like a passive main character because I think it's very interesting to see a character who's pushed along by the story itself, and you're seeing them respond to the situation. But I do think it's also much more difficult to write an interesting passive character, and I don't think it was very well done here. I really wanted to like Tessa, but she did spend probably 75 to 80% of this book complaining that she couldn't do anything, that she wasn't involved with what was going on, letting other people make decisions for her. And it did get to be a drag because there is a way to have a character who doesn't know how to do tech or mechanical things, who doesn't really understand what's going on, but they're still interesting, they're still involved. And she wasn't. She was, carrying things when told. She was cowering behind everyone else. She was very confused for about 130 pages. And it took her so much longer to reach the obvious conclusions. And again, I'm an adult reading this, so I know that I am probably going to reach the conclusions much faster than children. But it was very abundantly clear what was going on. Like, explained in the narrative about, like, the 120 page mark. And it took until the very, very end for Tessa to figure anything out. I think she needed more development. She needed more backstory. She needed not necessarily to be less cowardly, but to have more thought. Because she was supposed to be intelligent in her own way, in a very different way to this society that focuses so much on mechanical engineering and war and fighter planes and all that kind of thing. She's a reader and she's different. And I think there could have been a lot more done with that than was done in this book. I feel like as a main character, she was a weak way to tell the story, which was unfortunate because I do think with a little bit of rewriting, she could have really been wonderful. I also think in general, all of the characters were a little bit underdeveloped. We didn't get to learn very much about them. We didn't know much about their backstories or what was motivating them. A lot of what we learned was like very basic information, basic facts, things like the main thing that drove them. One of them had dead parents. One of them, killed a lot of people in the war and was feeling guilt over that. And it was like those were kind of their two main characteristics, and I kind of struggle to say anything else about them. And I wish we'd gotten to know them more. I wish the first half of this book had taken the time to develop these characters as it was setting up this world and this situation, instead of just taking a long time to throw them into the meat of the story. I really liked the ending. I liked what Haddix was trying to say here. I liked her social commentary. I liked the world and just like the overall concept of what this book was and what it was trying to say. And I like the characters in essence. I just do feel like this whole book was too short and too underdeveloped. It felt like it took too long to get to the point, and again, for 200 pages, it's been a lot of time doing nothing, and it could have done so much more, because I know she's written other books where she has done a whole lot more. This was still enjoyable to me. Like, it was a fun time. It was a really quick read. If you like dystopic middle grade, I think this is a lovely book to pick up, but I also feel like it would be low on my list of recommendations for her books, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it wasn't terrible by any means. It was well written. I liked the story. I loved the commentary. Just not my favorite of all of her books. Let me know down below if you've read The Always War and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.